Good evening, everyone. My name is David Elwood. I'm the Dean here at the Harvard Kennedy School. Welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. I'd like to welcome all of you here today to today's discussion entitled Making Democracy Work in Africa, Vision of an African Leader. Tonight's talk is actually one of a number of events. We not infrequently have the great pleasure to have leaders of the world come and speak, and actually in the next several days we will have three. Besides tonight's speaker, we will also be hosting President Uribe of Colombia tomorrow evening, and President Yudhoyono of Indonesia on Tuesday as well. But tonight we welcome the Prime Minister of Kenya, the Right Honorable Raila Odinga. But before I turn to my introduction of His Excellency, I just wanted to say a couple of things. First, I want to acknowledge some individuals who are here with us tonight. The Prime Minister's daughter, Rosemary Odinga, is here. The Honorable John Michuki, Kenya's Minister of Environment. And Kenya's Ambassador to the United States, the Honorable Peter Ogego. And my apologies to those of you I have missed. We do have many dignitaries here in the audience tonight. And I'd also like to thank the sponsors. This event is jointly sponsored by the Institute of Politics, which manages and runs all of our events here at the Forum, the Center for International Development, Professors Kalestis Juma and Michael Kremer of Harvard, Professor Sabni Turi of MIT, and MIT's Poverty Action Lab. Through their fine efforts, we have the Prime Minister with us tonight. So before I get started, I do have to say one other thing, which is to describe the ground rules of discussions here at the Kennedy School. This John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum is really one of the premier speaking places, not only at Harvard, but maybe even in the country and the world. And for almost 30 years, we've had ambassadors and presidents and prime ministers and Nobel Prize winners, as well as many, many others to address us. And we have only a couple basic rules. The first is, if someone speaks here at the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum, they must take questions from the audience. That is one of the expectations. But in exchange for that, when they speak and as they speak, they are expected, we give them unfettered opportunity to say what they have to say without interruption from the audience. And that's certainly critical to our principle of civil discourse throughout. And if someone does disrupt the event, I believe it's unfair to the speaker, and again, we all came here to hear the speaker. And so it's also, by the way, quite dangerous in the face of high security. And so, for those reasons, if you choose not to follow these rules, I will have to ask that you be escorted out. And in general, we very rarely have issues, and I would certainly not expect it tonight. But I appreciate all of you respecting those simple ground rules. Well, Prime Minister Odinga's beautiful nation of Kenya is really an extraordinary place with enormous opportunities, but also large challenges. As all of you know, it's a place really where humanity began in the Great Rift Valley, and of course magnificent animals roam throughout the nation, and magnificent people make up the large and diverse nation. It's also one of the most stable nations in Africa. It has free primary schooling for all, and the capital, Nairobi, of course, is the main financial hub and communications hub for East Africa. But Kenya, like so much of Africa, in fact, as so much of the world, faces real challenges of development, of governance, of corruption at times, and many other problems going forward. Prime Minister Odinga is in an excellent position to discuss those very challenges. As most of you know, he's the son of the very famous first Vice President of Kenya, at least the first Vice President since independence was gained in 1963. He was educated as a mechanical engineer in Eastern Germany, what was used to be called East Germany, and he returned to Kenya to teach at the University of Nairobi. His interest in politics, though, quickly led him into various political offices and to found several political parties. Since 1992, he's been a member of Parliament from Nairobi. He definitely knows the ups and downs of political life in a turbulent era. He has served with a number of presidents. He's also been detained without trial for years on end. He has at times been closely allied with leaders, and at other times challenged often those very same leaders for leadership and to help shape the direction of the nation. He served in the cabinet of President Daniel Arap Moi and in the current president, Kibaki. But in December 2007, or as part of the December 2000 election, he helped found the Orange Democratic Movement and served as the candidate. And in that highly contested election, the incumbent, President Kibaki, was declared the winner, but international observers and many Kenyans believed that there was substantial vote fraud, and as a result, violence took place after these elections. And it was quite tragic violence. More than 1,000 Kenyans were killed and more than 500,000 people were displaced from their homes. To end the violence and move Kenya forward, Prime Minister became the Prime Minister as part of a power-sharing arrangement brokered by then Secretary General Kofi Annan, and created a coalition where he served as the Prime Minister, and half the ministers were selected by him. Now, in this period, power sharing is a very difficult thing, and it's very difficult to accomplish all your goals, especially when people differ in those goals. But much has been accomplished during this period, nonetheless. One of the reasons for the visit and one of the activities that occurred earlier today was a group of people from MIT and from Harvard were meeting with the Prime Minister to talk about 3.5 million children and people who have been dewormed as part of the efforts of the Prime Minister. The violence has been quelled, but very large numbers of people remain displaced, and of course the challenges ranging from drought to floods to the economic crisis and many others challenge all leaders, and certainly this Prime Minister. But as a result of his unique set of experiences, his background, his connections, and his deep commitment to Kenya, he's in a particularly good position to offer us his thoughts and ideas on this critical topic. Please welcome Prime Minister Odu. Welcome.
Thank you, Dean David Elwood, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I am very delighted to see such a big audience here. I can see the hall is packed up to the brim. Let me begin by bringing to you greetings from the people of Africa. I stand here today, ladies and gentlemen, in this very historic little building named after John F. Kennedy, Jr., which is the School of Public Administration of the Harvard University, with great gratitude. This is a very touching and poignant moment for me personally as a person. It is because of the name of the person after which this institution is named. John F. Kennedy made a tremendous contribution to the struggle for liberation of Africa. It was John Kennedy who helped to prepare the first cadre of post-independent Kenyan leaders. In what is now known as the Kennedy airlift of 81 East Africans found their way into the United States to pursue higher education. Some of them became the leaders of our country. Since that time, the Harvard University has continued to generously accept a number of Kenyan leaders for undergraduate and postgraduate education. But it was also the widow of the late Robert Kennedy who helped our second liberation struggle in Kenya to overcome the oppression of the Moi regime in the 1980s. And for a long time, the voice of the late Ted Kennedy remained the most eloquent in the Senate in support of democratization in Kenya and the rest of Africa. Lastly, I was last evening at a reception hosted by your president, Barack Obama Jr., and he told me that he used to be editor-in-chief of the Harvard Law Review, and he asked me that when I come here, I should convey his greetings to you people. And therefore, with a sense of deepest gratitude that I discuss with you today the journey of democracy in Africa and my vision for the future. In my vision, a true democratic state in Africa harnesses the harmony among the diverse ethnic and religious communities. It creates harmony between the nature and development, and between wildlife and human habitat. Democracy will be the driving force to generate and sustain economic growth while assuring a fair distribution of wealth between the rich and the poor. Democracy will be the anchor for the social and economic stability. I want to spend the next few minutes in talking to you about Africa, the past, where we're coming from, where we are, and where we want to go. That is my vision for Africa. The past, I know, is known to most of you. But just to recap, the post-independent experience in Africa has not been a very pleasant one. Many African countries inherited fairly democratic institutions and constitutions at independence. But immediately thereafter, a school of thought developed that the Western model of democracy was alien to traditional African societies. That adversarial way of resolving issues was strange to Africa. That in the African traditional society allowed for conflict resolution by way of consensus building. Senghor called it palaver. So the founding fathers of African independence said that opposition was alien to traditional African society, that the gigantic task of nation building required consolidation of forces. And therefore, through a series of measures, coercion, bribery, intimidation, blackmail, opposition was led into extinction. Many African founding fathers, Nkrumah, Nyerere, Sékou Touré, Senghor, argued along those lines. With the extinction of the opposition, the checks and balances died with it. That then saw the advent of the big man leadership in Africa, the man with the stick, Mr. President, Monsieur le Président. So the institution of the presidency came to emasculate all other institutions of democracy. Nepotism, tribalism, corruption then became the order of the day because there were no checks and balances. So the Africans had therefore to go back to the trenches to fight for what has been called the second liberation of Africa. That struggle was protracted because in that period, that was also a period of the Cold War between the Western powers and communism. So if you are an African leader and you say that you are an ally of the West in the war against communism, nobody cared how you were running your affairs. That is how we created the Idi Amin Dadas of this world. He could kill so many people in Uganda, still become chairman of the OAU, Jean Bedel Bokassa of Central African Republic, crowned himself to be the emperor. We had Kamuzu Banda, who became the life president, the Ngwazi, saying that his opponents would become delicious food for the crocodiles in River Zambezi. Mobutu Sese Seko, Kunguwaza Banga. I can go on and on. Masias Nguema actually threatened the entire population with extinction. So it was not only after the fall of the Berlin Wall that the wind of change that blew in Eastern Europe also began to blow on the African continent. It is then that the West then began to support the struggles for change in Africa. A new vocabulary was invented: transparency, accountability, and good governance in management of public affairs. I'm saying that that was those, you can call those years the wasted years, because there was a lot of aid that was being pumped in Africa without much to show for it. Then, with the wind of change, new governance structures came up in the African continent. Multipartyism returned. Now the incumbents were forced, because initially, because of the introduction of single party, some countries witnessed the military coups that also brought in military dictatorships. So you had military dictatorships and single party dictatorships, mainly most of African countries. But beginning in the early 90s, these military dictatorships and the single party dictators then were toppled, and through the mass movement of the African people, a multi-party system came back to Africa. So now, with very few exceptions in most African countries, we now have multi-party governance. So this is now where we are. Many changes have taken place since 1990 upwards. With this better governance, a lot of changes have taken place in many African countries. The rate of economic growth has gone up. Average in for the last 10 years, most African countries have realized an average of 5% rate of growth. And the society has been more opened up. The African countries are beginning to make better use of their resources in this phase. But this phase also has seen some setbacks or reversals of the gains that have been made. We are in a transition phase from the single party and military dictatorships to multi-party democracy. The countries are at different phases of development. We have seen, for example, resistance by the ancient regime in some countries to give way completely. The leadership refusing to accept results of democratic elections. We have also seen other leaders revising the constitutions to allow themselves to run again for elections after their term had actually expired. These are cases you can count, revisions in this, where that category falls Zimbabwe. In that category also you have countries like Madagascar, Uganda, Kenya also to some extent, and Gabon. But there have also been some positive developments on the African continent. So, where do we want to go as Africans? I want to begin by saying that that I am a Pan-Africanist. And I am an Afro-optimist. As opposed to Afro-pessimists. Afro-pessimists are those who have given up on Africa. Those who say Africa cannot make it. Africa is a lost cause. Afro-optimists believe, like myself, in the ability of the African people to develop the African continent. And they say that, look, let us forget the past. Let us not continue to live in the past and blame colonialism for our underdevelopment. Many countries were colonized. United States was a colony of United Kingdom. Japan colonized many other countries in the East, and so on. Those countries moved on. At the time of independence of Kenya, and even Ghana, and so on, the economy of Kenya and that of South Korea were at par. In terms of per capita income, in terms of the levels of poverty, literacy rates, and all those major economic indicators were equivalent, Kenya and South Korea. 45 years down the road, the economy of Korea is 40 times bigger than that of Kenya. Bigger also than that of Ghana. So you ask yourself, what is it that the Koreans did right that the Kenyans got wrong? If you answer that question, then you are on the way to resolving the African problem. The Koreans and countries that have taken off are able to mobilize their human and natural resources for faster socio-economic development. And that is where we must begin as Africans. That Africa, which is the richest continent in terms of resources, is also the poorest. That is a paradox in kind. Why? Because Africa's resources have been plundered and used to develop other countries. Africa has continued to depend on aid. Money has been poured into a bottomless pit without much to show for it. Most of that money has found its way back to where it came from, in private bank accounts of individuals. Yet African generations of today have to pay for debts which were incurred by those corrupt leaders, which did not build anything. Every African child that is born today inherits a debt of thousands and thousands of dollars. We are saying, let us put that in the past and move on. Aid will not develop Africa. We need to now look at what we can do for ourselves. Investment is the most important. And secondly, trade. Investment, we must begin with domestic investment. How do we break this vicious cycle of poverty, which starts by saying we are poor, therefore we cannot save. We cannot save, therefore we cannot invest. We cannot invest, therefore we cannot develop, hence we are poor. So the countries that have managed to break that vicious cycle of poverty are the ones that have moved on. And that's the route that we must follow ourselves, by first providing opportunities for our people. But then we must also develop our human resource capacity. And that's the reason why I'm happy to be here, to be speaking here in Harvard, at Harvard University, and addressing audience from MIT, and from several other universities in this area. I know that I'm in the intellectual capital of the world. We want to benefit from the knowledge that is available here. This is now a knowledge-based economy, a knowledge-based world. And Africa will not develop unless Africa can develop its own manpower capacity and also to facilitate transfer of technology from these centers back to Africa. That is the reason why I have come here. I'm happy that I've met so many African students, many Kenyan students studying in these institutions. We want to establish proper relationship between us, our institutions of higher learning, and this institution of higher learning here. We, as a government, must create the necessary infrastructure back home. We must invest heavily. When I was announcing my campaign, I said, what are the solutions to Kenya's problem? For Kenya to take off first, number one, I said infrastructure. Number two, infrastructure. Number three, infrastructure. I have no reason to doubt, to change my mind on that. We need to open up our country. That's why we are investing very heavily in roads construction, in railways construction, in the field of IT infrastructure. We have constructed through public-private partnership a fiber optic undersea cable from Fujairah into Mombasa and into Kenya. And we have already rolled out the infrastructure network throughout the country. We are now setting up IT villages all over the country. We believe that this is the future. We want to set up business process outsourcing centers, which are going to create employment for a number of people. Some of them already have been set up in our country. We would like to make Kenya the hub in the East African seaboard. Kenya already has advantage in terms of geography, but we want to make it the center for communications and so on. We want to attract investments to come to Kenya. And to do this, we are trying to deal with those factors that have in the past scared away investment in the country. We believe very strongly in the private sector as the engine for economic growth and development. So, what are these factors? One was the issue I've mentioned, infrastructure, poor infrastructure. Two was the issue of bureaucratic red tape. Three was the question of security or insecurity. Four, the question of corruption. Those are the enemies of foreign direct investment. And those are the enemies that we are confronting head on. As far as corruption is concerned, you said, enough with the past. Many people still look at Kenya with the mirror of yesterday. But the grand corruptions like Goldenberg, Anglo-leasing, and so on are things of the past. It will not happen in this regime. We are dealing with the issues of infrastructure I've already mentioned. We are dealing with the issues of bureaucratic red tape to create one point stop shop for investors when they come into the country, and also dealing with the issues of security or insecurity. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude my remarks here once again by saying that in what all that we want to do in Kenya, which can also be replicated in the rest of Africa, we need partnership with institutions of higher learning like Harvard, like MIT, and so on. That's why in this mission I've come with my permanent secretary for higher education, Professor Kiamba, who is also an alumni of this school here. And I'm also accompanied here by the Vice Chancellor of Jomo Kenyatta University of Technology, Professor Marvel Imbuga. So we have come ready for partnership between Harvard, MIT, and Kenya. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. Now, we do have time for questions. There are microphones located in 4 locations. There is one located right here, another one up there, a third one is here, and a fourth one is there. And let me remind those of you that have been here before and tell those of you who have not what the ground rules are for questions. A question has 3 characteristics. First, you identify yourself and your affiliation. Second, you ask one question, a short thought. And third, it should end with a question mark. And so with that, let's take the first question right here.
Hi there, my name's Adam Cooper. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. Yesterday, the American government announced that they were threatening travel bans against 15 Kenyan government officials for, in their words, failing to support the reform process and not holding to account those responsible for post-election violence. What's your reaction to such a policy statement?
Well, yes, I really don't hold brief for the U.S. government. The U.S. government is totally entitled to do whatever they want to do. If they are convinced that the people they are banning from coming to the United States have been involved in any forms of impropriety. As you know, for example, the envelope of those who were alleged to have been involved in the post-election violence was a secret. It was handed over to Kofi Annan, who handed it over to Juan Moreno Ocampo. So we are not privy to what it contains. If the U.S. government knows, we'll be happy to share the information with them.
Next, right up here.
Hi, my name is Dennis Mora. I'm a member of the Harvard College. You mentioned in your speech several inspiring aspects of your vision for the future, not just in this brief period, but assuming that things go well in 2012 into the future there as well. But what I wanted to ask is, we know that those who do not learn from the mistakes of the past are doomed to repeat them, and witnessing the grand scale of horror and tragedy that occurred on the Kenyan soil in the 1992, 1997, and 2007 elections, what measures will your government take in place to ensure that Kenyans will never have to suffer through such hardship and terror and blatant disregard for human rights ever again?
That is a good question. As you know, I myself have been a victim of impunity in the past. That I was detained 3 times for a total of nearly 9 years without trial. The impunity that you're referring to are the the violence that took place before 1992 elections, 97, 2002, and these last ones. Those are the ones, as you know, unlike the 2007, those are the ones actually preceded the elections, the violence. And if you look at them, they were mainly state instigated. This last time round, the violence came after the elections. And what was the trigger of the violence? The trigger of the violence was the manipulation of the presidential election results, which the people saw on the television screens. And they protested, and that protest was spontaneous. However, the other people also took advantage of that situation to settle some of the old scores. So issues like land became the cause, issues like inequality and the distribution of wealth around the country became also other factors, as well as ethnicity. So what we are doing is first, we see that some of those issues can be dealt with through the reforms, the land issues. That's why, for the first time since independence, we have come up with a draft land policy, which has already been approved by the cabinet and is now on its way to parliament to be approved. Two was the issue of ethnicity and historical injustices. We have set up a Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission to deal with the issues of historical injustices in our country, to deal with all those other past cases like the 92 violence, 97 and 202. With regard to the 207 violence, there was a proposal to set up a special tribunal. That matter, of course, was the bill was passed by the cabinet but was rejected in parliament. We are now in the process of trying to see if it can be passed again by parliament. So generally, we are trying to deal with the past violations of human rights in order to ensure that there's no recurrence in the future.
Next, right up here.
Thank you very much. I'm Manisha Dukoni. I'm from Mauritius, and I'm also a student at the Kennedy School. You spoke about your vision for Africa. I wanted to know, what is your vision for the Eastern and Southern African region in terms of regional integration, and what steps have been taken by the government forward in relation to that?
In Eastern Africa, you know that we now have revived the defunct East African community. We have even expanded it to include other countries, Rwanda and Burundi. So now we have Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda and Burundi, a 5-nation community. We have already come up with a charter and which says that we want to move towards a federation by the year 2013. We have trading blocks there. We have got COMESA and also SADC. And there are proposals to try to merge both COMESA and SADC into one bigger trading bloc. We believe that these regional blocks can be the building bricks for one united Africa. But we need to move in stages. So I have said I'm a Pan-Africanist. I believe truly that the destiny of Africa is one. Thank you.
Right over here.
My name is Tina Ramey. I'm a Harvard affiliate. I'm a professor at Cambridge College, and I am the president of CARE. I'd like to commend you for your support of democracy for all Kenyans, in particular for your support of the Samburu tribe in March, following the brutal attacks by the Kenyan police, which resulted in many deaths of innocent people and loss of thousands of cattle, which pushed them into a severe famine. This conflict has been labeled a mere cattle raid in the press. However, the use of sophisticated weaponry such as hand grenades and artillery, fleets of vehicles to remove their livestock, media cover-ups, and brutal deaths of innocent women and children as they sleep in their homes at night, as well as the recruitment of the Oromo Liberation Front, a Somali-Ethiopian militia which was hired to assist them in ongoing attacks as early as last week against this tribe, suggest an early genocide.
Your question, please.
What does your office recommend the Samburu do to prevent a full-scale genocide or displacement from the land that they've occupied for centuries? And what are you doing to help them with the famine now that they've lost all of their income and food?
Well, inter-ethnic conflict over land and over livestock and so on is something that has been on for some times. It is something that we have inherited from the previous regime. As you know that through the policy of divide and rule, some sections of the communities have been armed against the others, like the Pokots, and then you have the Turkanas, and you've got Samburus, and the Boranas, and the Merus. So it's not just confined to the Samburu. You also have the Boranas who are complaining, the Merus, the Turkanas, and so on. So what we have decided on as a government was to ensure disarmament of all these communities, to ensure that nobody has got weapons with which to move and annihilate another community the way that this has been happening in the past. So we are even deploying the military in this exercise to disarm some of these communities, except for those who live along the border. Because along the border we have another problem. Because we have other cases where armed people from Ethiopia move on across the border to Kenya to kill and take animals away. The same thing with Sudan, and also to an extent northwestern border with Uganda. So that is the thing. The thing is that the government is very concerned and is on top of this matter, and we're going to resolve it.
People just stand here. Right here.
Good evening, Your Excellency. My name is Mombi Michelle. I'm a graduate student at Emerson College, and my question is, well, according to Kenya's Vision 2030, it says, and I quote, the government also recognizes that in an open democratic society like Kenya, a vigilant press are the ultimate defense against abuse of office. How do you answer critics that say that the Kenya Communications Bill, or dubbed the Media Bill, infringes on the rights of the press?
I agree. I agree totally. And I was one who actually disagreed, and we agreed to revisit the matter. And under my chairmanship, we have sat together with the media owners group and the Ministry of Communications and the Attorney General's office. And we've come up with what we consider to be reasonable amendments, which will ensure that that bill or that act guarantees true freedom of the press.
Right up here.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. My name is Badi Balde. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. Like you, I'm a Pan-Africanist, and I have a few questions along these lines, but particularly on Zimbabwe. I know that the power sharing deal that happened in Zimbabwe was inspired from the power sharing deal that happened in Kenya. So I was wondering if you can comment on your influence or role, if you played one there, and what are the chances of success. If I may add one on that, like, still on Zimbabwe, the same topic.
One question, I'm sorry. Thank you.
So, well, yes.
The second one is much more interesting. So what is it that in Africa we still protect the dictators? in Zimbabwe, we still have the same people protecting somebody who everybody agrees is not doing the right thing. But we don't see any leader in Africa condemning that. And what is your position on that?
Well, I say that Africa is in transition, that there have been reversals in some places. Others, you find the ancient regime unwilling to yield ground, even after losing an election. And I had also said that the Kenyan example should not be used as a model, because otherwise you'll find that the incumbents will lose elections, and then they hang on, hoping that a negotiated settlement is going to be found, that we will end up with a power-sharing arrangement. And the sooner that happened, then Mugabe followed suit. And it was in Zimbabwe where elections were held, and 1 month later the results had not been announced. And everybody was quiet. But I spoke about it, that this can only happen in Africa. Then at the end they say that although so-and-so won, he did not get the requisite numbers, 50 plus 1, and therefore there's need for a rerun. But they don't say how many votes Tsvangirai got, how many votes Mugabe got. So I have said that these dinosaurs in Africa have become part of the endangered species. They are definitely on their way out. They have a bigger problem in Zimbabwe than we have in Kenya. Why Robert Mugabe is not Mwai Kibaki? There's a difference. Robert Mugabe would like to monopolize and control power. He is not willing to share that power. And that's the reason why we have a problem. And I said myself that it was a big tragedy and embarrassment that Mugabe should be welcomed at the African Union meetings with velvet gloves. But basically because he is dealing there with leaders who have got the same problems back home. So he's playing in his own league there in the African Union. But I want you to know that this is a transitionary phase, that ultimately all this order is going to give way to a true democratic Africa.
Right up here.
Good evening, Prime Minister Odinga. My name is Aisha Osori, and I'm from Nigeria, and I'm a graduate at the Kennedy School. My question is about ethnicity. You've described yourself as a Pan-African, so I'd like an answer that encompasses Africa. Why does ethnicity continue to play such a strong role in our development and our politics? And with due respect, sir, I'd like you not to answer in terms of saying that the politicians are the ones that drive us, the different ethnic groups, to fight each other, because we've lived with each other for at least 40 years and we're still fighting each other. So what in your mind might be one other reason why ethnic groups in Africa can't seem to live together?
Ethnicity is a disease of the elite in Africa. Because it's the elite who are in competition for resources use ethnicity to discriminate against each other. So the argument will be, if one is being removed, oh, the whole of my tribe is being finished. And they go and rally their people behind them. But it started with the leadership I talked about. That the leadership, which was not visionary, surrounds itself with an elite from its own ethnic community. So that ethnicity becomes responsible for disparity in terms of distribution of resources in the country. And that authoritarian presidency I talked about. So people from other communities feel excluded. The game of exclusion, rather than the game of inclusion, is the order of the day. So these people then feel that they are not safe until their man from their own tribe is there in State House. So it is the governance structure, the way Africa has been ruled, that is responsible for enhancement of ethnicity. But there are other success stories in Africa. One of them is in Tanzania. Where Mwalimu Nyerere, a visionary African leader, completely killed ethnicity by creating higher values to which people could aspire, that were uniting the people of Tanzania. Tanzania shares a common border with Kenya. I have this common language, Swahili. But when you go to Tanzania and you speak as a Kenyan and you ask which tribe are you, they'll tell you, oh, you're a Kenyan. Here in Tanzania, we don't ask which tribe. We ask which region you come from. You see, so it is possible to actually kill ethnicity. I've been saying that it is a big embarrassment for Africans to still be thinking along ethnic lines. Oh, this is an Igbo, this is a Yoruba, this one is a Hausa. I know the Nigeria very well because I'm half Nigerian. I know it. I'm saying at the time when this country has elected a man of African descent as his president, you still want to discriminate against an Igbo or a Tutsi or a Hutu and kill. I think we must move on as African people. We must become members of the modern human race and leave this issue of ethnicity. That is basically a biological accident. You never chose to be born an Igbo or a Yoruba. So I say that Africa will not develop until we completely break with the past and unite our people along the national rather than ethnic lines.
Right over there.
Good evening, Your Excellency. My name is Rosie Osire. I go to Wellesley College. And I have a question just following up on your speech. It is very timely because today in my development economics class we were saying, the professor basically said Africans are so poor, they can't save, they can't invest, and so we can't do it on our own and we need international donors, we need external help to push us out of the poverty trap. So what do you think of this and what do you think is the proper role of official development assistance, IMF, World Bank, and the whole convoluted soup of international donors?
Well, what I said was that it is possible for people to save in Africa by first creating wealth, because you cannot save what you don't have. For example, you have poor farmers in the rural Africa. Those poor farmers can be empowered. We are doing it right now in Kenya. They have been very successful in Malawi by assisting those farmers with implements to be able to till larger acreage, provide fertilizer, provide quality seeds, that the yield will grow sometimes 3 or 4 times, so that they move away from just subsistence to commercial farming. And that way they have the surplus to save. You see, there must be a collective effort between the people and the government. That's what is going to move us away from this poverty cycle. We have our other artisans which can be empowered to be given access to the markets, to be able to sell the goods that they are producing. And then we must also encourage the culture of saving rather than just spending or consumption. You see, look at the Jews. The Jew will come and say, and that is how it started, borrow me 10 cents. Not give me, the way we say it back home. And just give me. They say borrow me. And then you will go and tighten the belts. You will go and use that to go and buy a shoe brush and shoe polish. You'll be polishing the shoes of people. Within 1 week, you'll bring back your money. And then he's got his own. That will be polishing shoes. From there, he'll start a kiosk. That kiosk will become a restaurant. That restaurant will become an hotel. That hotel will become another hotel. Eventually, it will become chains of hotels all over. I'm talking about the story of Hilton or Sheraton. If you go, that's how it started. Mr. Toyota, he used to be repairing bicycles. From bicycles, he went to scooter, a motorbike, a smaller car. Then eventually you have the Toyota Empire, or even Suzuki. So you see, we want to see the African equivalent of those people. And it can be done. I believe very strongly that it can be done.
From my whole family, Mama Pajero and everyone.
Thank you.
Right over here.
Good evening, Mr. Prime Minister. Thank you for your inspiring speech. I'm Samuel Klein. I was an undergraduate here, and I work now for One Laptop Per Child. You mentioned during your speech that Kenya has built its connection to the internet and the rest of the world through an undersea cable. And you made comparisons between Kenya and South Korea, which now has 10 times the broadband access that we have even here in the States. I believe by the end of this year, there will be 3 different cables connecting Kenya to the rest of the world. And Kenya will essentially be the way that much of the landlocked countries get access. How do you see the countries in Africa working together to improve communication networks and access to knowledge?
Yes, what we did was conscious. We did it consciously to lead because other countries were taking too long to make a decision. See, there was the CECOM, then the teams, and so on. So Kenya decided to go it alone. Eventually, those other ones also made their decisions, as usual, to come and join. So ultimately, all those cables are meeting at Mombasa. And this is actually going to facilitate faster communication within the African continent itself. You see, Africa has been more connected with the North than among itself, even in terms of trade and communications. Like you'll find that Ghana borders Togo. Yes, in the past, the telephone call from Accra to Lomé would first go through London, then Paris, then come back next door. So we want to interconnect Africa. But we also, through this now, also promote inter-African trade and make it easier. Remove these barriers that exist between Africa. It is easier for American businessman to come to Kenya than a Nigerian businessman to come to do business in Kenya. Because an American can come to Kenya and get a visa directly at the airport. Just pays $50. A Nigerian, when he goes to Kenyan embassy here, the visa has to be referred to Nairobi first before he gets it. So basically what I'm trying to say is that this interconnectivity on the African continent is actually moving Africa to another higher plane, which is going to make Africa more competitive in the international market.
Right up here.
Good evening, Your Excellency, and welcome to Boston. My name is Faye Koich, and I'm a private business owner in Kenya, and I'm a former NGO worker in Uganda and in Kenya. My question is in reference to your speech, and that's about building leadership in Africa, and particularly in Kenya, where we see that the members of parliament, for instance, have quite a few issues actually staring them in the face at the moment that would fall under the umbrella of corruption. And you talked about 4 different aspects that you think are obstacles to the growth and development of Africa as a whole: infrastructure, bureaucracy, security, and corruption. And if it's okay with you, I would like to think that there's a 5th, and that's accountability. What accountability does the parliament have in Kenya to the people of Kenya? What do the leaders have by way of even looking back at traditional life and the accountability that they know that is due to the people? So I'm curious about the whole issue of accountability in Kenya.
A very good question. Yes, as you know, Parliament, even in this country, has a very distinct role. And it's no different in Kenya, that Parliament legislates, Parliament appropriates money for the government, and Parliament is also the watchdog of the people to ensure that money voted by Parliament is spent by the government for the purpose for which it was voted. So in that role, the Parliament is the people's watchdog. And the Kenyan Parliament has played this role in the past. But let me talk about this particular Parliament. This particular Parliament has now distinguished itself as very assertive in playing its role and in holding the executive to check to ensure that there is no impunity in the country. There, of course, in the Kenyan society, is more open, more transparent than many African countries. We have a very vibrant media. We also have very vibrant civil society. So there are very many whistleblowers in our country. And when they blow the whistles, Parliament takes it up and raises questions in Parliament. Members raise questions in Parliament. Also, when the executive does something that breaks the law, Parliament is there. A case in point here is the recent appointment by the President of the Director of the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission and his 2 deputies, which was done without consultations and without following the due process. Because the Act says that Advisory Board recommends, Parliament vets, then the Executive appoints. And that procedure was not followed. Parliament appointed a committee that investigated the issue and came up with a report which said that the law was broken. The matter was debated in Parliament last week, and Parliament said, yes, the President acted ultra vires the law, and therefore decided to nullify that appointment. So that shows that the Parliament is becoming more and more assertive in holding the executive to check in Kenya.
Okay, I'm afraid we have time for just 2 short questions. This will be the second to last question. That will be the last.
Okay, good evening, Mr. Prime Minister. First of all, let me clarify for you the difference between Kenya and South Korea. South Korea has access to American market. South Korea has American military base, and Kenya didn't have it. And so you have to appreciate the impact of that. Now, I very attentively listened to you, and I'm very appreciative. You said you're a Pan-Africanist. My question to you is this. Would you be ready in 2015 to give up your position as President of Kenya so that the United States of Africa will have a president, which you would deny yourself? Could you be ready to do that? By the way, my name is Basil Lemwabara. I'm writing a book on Africa. Thank you.
My answer is yes, I'll be ready.
Right here, last question. There's a model question, by the way.
Your Excellency, my name is Martin Owino. I'm the chair of a group of Africans here from Caribbean through Somalia to Eastern Africa and South Africa. This great city is called Boston, is a Red Sox nation. Where you are having your meeting is Yankee zone. And I wanted to put it this way for you, and you guys help me out. Your Excellency, you have been fighting for tribalism in Kenya for a long time. Since I knew him, I'm from Kenya, he has fought that tooth and nail. Here we do have rivals, Red Sox and Yankee. But interestingly, they are only rivals in the pitch. When the game is over, they shake their hands and everybody goes. So my question is not to you, sir, but to you all. If I give His Excellency a cap for Red Sox, will he be safe to walk in Yankee zone in New York? With that laughter, it's okay, sir. Continue fighting. This group of African diaspora in Boston here is fighting with you, and we are having you with solidarity. We will not fail. As they always describe, failing is not only falling down, but getting up every time you fall down. You have always been getting up, and we thank you, sir. God bless you in your fight. We are all together.
Thank you. That's it. Final word?
Thank you. Thank you. That is so well put. I must say that I'm touched. They say sleeping is not falling. So I've not just I've been sleeping, but I've not yet fallen. But let me say this: we in Kenya are talking about Vision 2030. A lady actually quoted from it somewhere up there. This Vision 2030 aims at transforming the Kenyan economy from a third world economy to a middle income economy by the year 2030. That is just 21 years from now. Or if you count backwards, it is to 1988. Some people say it is an overambitious plan. But I believe very strongly that that is realizable. But if you want to realize it in the period that is remaining, it means that you must manage time. Seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, years. And then we are able to get where we want to go. The Kenyan dream says that, is to be found in the Kenyan national anthem. When first verse says, Lord of all creation, bless this land of ours. Plenty be found, justice be our shield and defender. May we dwell in unity, peace, and liberty. Plenty be found within our borders. That dream or vision envisions a country that is liberated, that is free, where there's democracy, because justice be our shield and defender, where people are united, therefore there's no ethnicity, no tribalism, and plenty be found within our borders, a prosperous nation. A country that will offer equal opportunity to all its citizens, from the cradle to the grave. That every child will have opportunity to realize their dreams. Everybody will have an opportunity for upward social mobility, irrespective of their origins. Every citizen, when he's sick, will be able to receive proper Medicare. Employment will be available to all the citizens. That is the dream that was envisioned by our founding fathers. Each time they have continued to push the goalposts. They came with Vision 1990. They pushed it in 2000, went near 2010, 2015, 2025. Now we're talking 2030. And I've said I don't want us to approach and talk of 2050. I believe strongly that it is realizable. I also believe strongly that it is possible to transform the African economy and African landscape, or Africa to join the rest of the human race. That Africa is not condemned to poverty. I believe strongly that we can transform the 21st century to be the African century. It is possible. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. We've been very pleased to have you here. And thanks to all of you for being here. Have a safe journey home. Good evening.